So most of you know, I think, that my husband and I have a couple of beekeeping businesses, and one of the things that we need to do every season is look out for and collect honeybee swarms. So I thought be a good opportunity to show you some of the bee work that we do. So bee swarms are just a natural part of the honeybee cycle. So it's the method that they use to naturally reproduce. And so it's a way of expanding bee numbers. It's not just hives moving from one location to another. It's usually the existing hive stays where it is, and the swarm is over half the bees that split out and go to find a new location. So there's a few different reasons and that bees will swarm, and most of them have to do with the amount of space that is in the hive. So if there's too many bees and they don't all fit into the hive box, and there's too much room for the queen pheromone to be distributed around the hive, that can be one reason that the bees will decide to swarm. Also, if there's not enough room for the queen to lay her eggs, then they're not going to stay as strong. So again, time to find a new place. And also, if there's not enough room to bring in resources that the bees need to survive, like nectar and pollen, then that's another reason that they'll swarm. So swarming is a decision that the hive makes. It's not up to the queen. They have what we call the hive mind, where they're able to communicate and make decisions. And so the actual swarming process, what happens is the bees are able to produce new queens within the hive. So you can see in the bottom picture there, those little specks that look like grains of rice, they're actually bee eggs. So the queen lays those eggs and they hatch out into these little larvae, which are also in the bottom picture. And when a larvae is up to 3 days old, it can be converted into a queen bee. And this process is controlled by the diet that the bees are fed. So once they start feeding the worker bees with pollen and with a mixture of what they call bee bread, which is pollen, nectar, and bee saliva, then they will turn into a worker bee. And most of the hive's made up of worker bees. So the vast majority is all females, usually between about 20,000 and 60,000 bees in a hive. And usually there's only one queen bee. So by feeding the young larvae on royal jelly, instead of changing that diet over, the larvae will develop into a new queen. So what happens, the bees will create a number of these swarm cells, or we call them queen cells, but if it's particularly for swarming, then they're swarm cells. And before these cells hatch out as queen bees, more than half the hive will actually relocate. So the hive in effect swarms, and it's over 60% usually of the bees. They eat as much honey as they can before they leave, so that they're not starting off with nothing when they go to their new location. So they will take the original queen. She will be part of the swarm. They'll take the honey resources, and they normally look for a home that's fairly close by. So the bees will settle usually within 200 meters, and then they have scouts that go out and look for new locations. So bees are one of the very few true democracies that exist. So they will vote on where their new home is going to be. They have scout bees that go out and just explore all the areas within sort of 200 to 500 meters of the existing hive, and then they will cast a vote as to which area they think they should go to, and they communicate this with their body language, and how enthusiastically they move communicates how much they prefer one place over another. So there can be sort of between 200 and a few thousand scout bees during this process going out and looking for a new hive location. So if we go back to the original hive, then as I mentioned, there are these queen cells that are waiting to hatch. And a few days after the hive has swarmed, the first queen will emerge, and usually she goes around and basically kills off any other potential rival queens, and ensuring that she is the one that's going to survive and will be the queen in the hive. And she'll get fed up on a lot of nutrition. She's very hungry when she hatches. And about a week in, she'll go out onto her mating flights. And when she comes back, she's ready to be the new queen and lay all of the eggs for the hive. So queen bees, if they're not mated, they can still lay eggs, but they're only going to be drone brood, which are the male bees, which don't contribute much to the hive. They basically mate with queens, and that's about it. So really super important that the queens go out and have good mating flights and come back so that they can lay the worker larvae, or eggs and larvae. Now, swarms in managed beehives, they are the responsibility of the beekeeper. So if you manage a beehive and your hive does actually swarm, you need to go and catch that swarm. And therefore, most beekeepers will try and minimize swarming by checking for signs that the hive is ready to swarm. So if it doesn't have enough space and it's starting to get overcrowded, then if it's in a traditional, what we call a Langstroth hive, which is the one with those boxes that you can load up vertically, then you can add another box onto the hive, and that gives the bees extra room to spread out. And so we do find that with a lot more hobby beekeepers coming onto the scene, then there's more swarming and more hive relocations that need to happen as a result, because not everyone catches their hives when it does swarm, even though you are supposed to technically. So what do swarms look like? I had a photo earlier. Your typical type of swarm looks like a ball of bees that's hanging from a tree somewhere. Bees generally like to be up high, but bees do their own thing. They will sometimes be up high. They will sometimes be down low. They will go on posts. They will hang off trampolines and swings and be on cars and pretty much anywhere they decide to go. They can also come from trees. So one other thing I should mention with this one, bees can swarm if they abscond from a hive. So if they're getting attacked by other insects and they feel that the hive isn't a safe place to be, or if resources are so scarce that they don't think they'll be able to survive the location, then they can actually abscond from the hive, and that will look like a swarm as well. This picture on the left with the tree, that's a forced abscond. So that's one where we actually had to relocate the bees from that tree. So we put a mixture of essential oils down there that the bees really don't like, and that will force them to leave the hive. It's not our preferred method of relocating hives, but that is one way to produce a swarm from a hive as well. And finally, if you see them mid-flight, it'll be a mass of thousands and thousands of bees in the air. You will hear them before you see them. It sounds a bit like an aeroplane taking off if you're in the middle of a swarm. They're very loud. There's just so many bees around. Usually they're not aggressive because they eat all that honey before they swarm, which means their honey stomach, which is separate to their digestive stomach, when that's full, they're firstly in a better mood because they're all full and happy. But secondly, it's harder for them to bend over when they've filled up their honey stomach with honey, and therefore it's a lot more difficult for them to sting. So swarms are generally placid, but if they've been out for a number of days and they've started consuming their honey stores and they start to get stressed because they don't have a home, then they can turn aggressive in those situations. So swarms can end up in rather strange areas. Usually they just go outside and look for a new location there. This video I'm about to show is a rather rare situation. There's no sound. I've removed the sound on it, so don't worry about that. But this is a swarm that ended up inside somebody's house. The bees came down the chimney, decided it was a good place to live. They do get it wrong occasionally, and this is one of those instances. They came in here. When bees come inside, they'll usually end up near a window because they're looking for the light or a way to get out again. This is a very non-typical swarm collection in this instance because we needed to get the bees out as quickly as possible. So we have a few other tricks and tools that we can use, such as a specially designed bee vacuum that doesn't harm the bees. And in this instance, that's how we dealt with this particular swarm. However, there are standard ways of collecting swarms, and that's what I will show you right now. So this is a big swarm, as you can see. This is on a friend's property, and when we're going to collect a swarm, you get your hive equipment ready. Because it's such a big swarm, we put 2 boxes. Normally swarms can just be caught in one hive box. However, if there's a lot like that, sometimes you'll need a couple of boxes. You can see the frames are in there ready to go. You don't want to just put bees into a box and forget about them because they'll make a mess with building out all the comb. So this is me in action, needing some better secateurs. The easiest way to get a swarm is, if they're hanging from a branch, then you need to cut it if you can. You can also put the hive box underneath the swarm and try and shake the bees in there. But if you're able to gather them all in one nice section, then that's an easier way of doing it. So here, just cutting off this palm frond. As I said, the bees engorge themselves on honey. It's a lot heavier than it looks. So some of the bees landed on the ground, but they will find their way back into the hive. The whole aim here is to get the queen bee into the hive box, because then the other bees will follow and find her. So big shake or a few shakes. That gets most of the bees into the box. And they will already start telling one another that they've found a home, that this is the spot. Now, I don't want to leave a big gap in there, because they'll just build comb all across it and you won't be able to get the frames out. So I very gently just put the frames on top. The bees are all moving underneath, and so as they get out of the way, the frames will just sink down further. They will start building comb within hours of deciding that they're going to stay in a place. I've just got one frame that needs straightening in there. So the entrance to the hive is actually at the bottom in the far space that you can't see at the moment. But we don't want the bees orienting to the top of the hive and telling the remaining bees to try and get in at the top. So it's important to put the lid on to avoid confusion for them. And then they will find the entrance, which I'll show in a minute. And they will tell their friends. So this is the entrance to the box. Bees are very, very sensitive to smell. So they communicate via, well, they have a few different methods, but one way is via pheromones. And the video has stopped there, it's not frozen. And so they're able to let the rest of the swarm know where they've set up home. And just go to the next slide. So the pheromones, when they swarm, they have this one in particular that's an attractant. It orients the bees to where the rest of the hive is and helps them to return from foraging as well. So Nasanov, it smells like lemongrass. So sometimes if beekeepers want to attract honeybee swarms just to an empty hive box, sometimes they'll put just a very small amount of lemongrass in there to try and draw some of the bees in to consider it as a new home. But that pheromone also helps the young virgin queens when they're going out on their mating flight. It's really essential for the survival of the hive that she comes back to maintain the bee numbers. So they will also release that hormone when she's getting back to the hive. But mostly it's used during this swarming process to let the other bees know. This is what we call fanning. The bees kind of stick their butts up into the air and they will flap their wings, which helps to distribute the hormone out to the other bees so that they can find the hive. Once they've settled into the hive, the queen also produces pheromones herself, mandibular and tarsal. That just means mandibular from the mouth, and tarsal, she has the ability to produce hormones from her back legs as well. And these communicate to the hive that everything's okay, that she's laying, there's lots of young brood there, and the queen's hormone also prevents other bees from thinking that, okay, we need to produce other queens. So it just lets them know that everything's queen right in the hive, and it stimulates the behavior of the bees to forage and to rear the brood. So just to see that in action, if the hive chooses its own location, and that can be a hive box, and they are going into the hive. Before I get to that, just a few photos of the bees fanning. But I also have a video of that occurring. And this is where a swarm's been collected. It's only a very small swarm, so some of it was outside, but this is the bee march. So once they've chosen a home, and in the previous video, those bees that were left on the ground will walk up to the entrance of the hive and go in. So at the front and on the sides, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's a number of bees fanning that pheromone out. Up in the tree, very high up, is where that swarm came from. There's a few other bees up there which need to be collected and will be brought in. They would probably find their own way, but we just go up and bring them down anyway to make sure they get in. And that's the main method of collecting swarms, either to put them into the box, or if they're on a post, we often use things like just a clean dustpan, and you can actually scoop the bees up and put them into the hive. The way that the professionals do this, this is my husband literally up a tree. So you can also find the queen in a swarm. So she generally runs around the outside of a swarm because she's a bit more sensitive to heat, and she'll overheat if she's right in the middle of all the bees. So she likes to be on the outside and run around there. So another option is to sit and observe the bees. Obviously need to be confident in being able to locate the queen bee. This is how my husband Shane normally catches them. He takes a little clip up called a queen clip. It has some slots on it where the worker bees can get through to look after the queen, but the queen herself can't get out of this little clip. So he'll climb up or go to wherever the swarm is, look for the queen, catch her in the clip, and then just pop the clip into the hive, and all the bees will follow the queen down into the hive. When you're collecting swarms in this way, one of the benefits is that we can actually keep the queen in the clip for a few days to make sure that the bees stay in that hive and that they don't decide just to take off and go somewhere else, because they won't leave the queen when she can't escape with them. So what else do we do? Swarm collection is actually just a really small part of our business. Usually, because it's fairly straightforward and easy to do in terms of bee work, we tend to pass on our leads for swarm collection to bee clubs or new beekeepers that are wanting hives of their own so they can go out and catch it themselves. And we concentrate more on the difficult hive relocations. So that's things like removing hives from trees and the walls of buildings. Shane has a background in the building industry, so he's comfortable dismantling parts of houses and roofs and other areas where bees may decide to go. And we're the only organisation in Victoria that will do beehive relocations from chimneys as well. And so we're kind of the last call for a lot of beehive relocations. If other beekeepers are not comfortable relocating bees for whatever reason, or if they think the job's too difficult, then they will call us as part of Bee Removals Victoria, and we will do the job for them. The other thing that we do is all of our honey products, honey, mead, beeswax products, and we sell these at various farmers markets and events.